Let's recreate this IKEA pillow advert in Blender. We don't need this scene, so we are sadly going to select all with A and delete with X. To start with the bottle, we're going to use the circle. Select this and tap 1 on your number pad to go into the front facing view. Make sure you're in edit mode and tap A again to select all. Tap E and Z to extrude all vertices in the Z axis. We want to inset the top of this pillow pot, but to do so we need to fill this area. F to fill and I to inset. We're only going to inset slightly as this pillow pot has quite a large opening. Again, we are going to extrude in the Z and inset slightly. This creates this small bump. Then, to complete the outline of this bottle, we're going to extrude in the Z axis once more. This is the basic pillow pot shape. Now we want to fill the bottom of this mesh, Alt select the bottom edge and hit F again to fill. Inset this face, delete the new middle face, and fill again with grid fill at the top. This helps further down the line with any shading issues. We are now going to create the opening at the top of the bottle and start beveling our edges. Alt select this edge and tap Ctrl B to bevel. Change between vertice, edge and face select by tapping 1, 2 or 3. Use the scroll on your mouse to increase or decrease bevels. We're going to do this with all our edges. Once we have all our edges beveled, we're going to right click the mesh and hit Shade Smooth. On top of this, we are also going to add a subdivision modifier just to smooth out the bottle a little bit more. 2 in the viewport should be fine. To create the thickness of the pot, we're going to add a solidify modifier. Bring the offset to +1 and adjust the thickness to how you like it. I liked mine at 0.09, but as long as the modifier isn't applied, this can always be changed later. Next we are going to create our label. This part is easy. Select the bottle and hit Shift D. Tap / to go into isolate mode and 1 to go into vert select. Go into X-ray view by tapping Alt Z and select all of the top and bottom vertices. Delete all and we are left with our label. It's a good habit to keep organised, so I like to make sure I'm renaming my objects as I go along. Shift select the label and then the bottle. Right click, parent and select make parent without inverse, keep transform. As I'm editing this, I noticed that I messed this up and didn't actually parent the object, so you need to make sure you're shift selecting. Select your pot once again. This time we are making the lid. Same process again. X-ray view, vert select, but this time we are deleting all the bottom verts, leaving us with the cap at the top. I removed this solidify modifier and filled in both edges. Inset to prevent shading problems and added loop cuts, Ctrl R to get the desired lid shape. Coming out of isolate mode, I resized but made sure to set the origin to center of mass first. Make sure you're renaming your lid. Let's move on to the twisty bit. Hide all our objects and add a circle to our scene. In edit mode, select all and move in the X-axis. To get the screw look, we're going to add a screw modifier. Who would have guessed? Make sure the Y-axis is selected and adjust the screw and angle settings. You can also create a skinnier screw shape by scaling the circle. I also doubled the amount of segments to 32. Come back into object mode and rotate 90 degrees in the X-axis. Unhide your bottle and reposition and size the screw to where we want it. We don't want these harsh edges on the end, so to prevent this we're going to go back into edit mode, fill both ends and bevel. Make sure to tap C to clamp overlap. Rename and parent. This is our completed bottle. Hide all and let's move on to the pillows. Add a plane and scale slightly in the Y-axis. In edit mode, subdivide by between 10 and 20. 20 works best for me, so I selected 20. In vertices select, tap A to select all and extrude slightly in the Z axis. To unselect our mesh and come to the top where it says select sharp edges. Come up to the other corner and tap this little button here. S to scale and tap 0. This will merge these edge points. Believe it or not, this is our pillow. We just want to add some pressure to the middle. To do this, we're going to add a cloth sim. Set the gravity to 0. Make sure to check the pressure box and add the value of around 2. Tap your spacebar to start the sim and tap again to stop. You can choose which part of the simulation that works best by playing with the timeline at the bottom. Right click your mesh and shade smooth. This part is all about playing around. As you can see here, I went through a few simulations. Just make sure that you are bringing the timeline back to 0 after each simulation to reset your model. I actually started over with a new pillow too and adjusted the mesh. I was happy with this pillow, so this is the pillow we're using. To create these grooves here, I went into edit mode and marked 5 seams. This just prevents any confusion when I add these loop cuts. I dragged them in slightly so they're close to the seams. I then selected the seams and scaled in the Z-axis. I then did a similar process with both sides of the pillow to create a creased or sewn kind of look. Control R for these loop cuts. Then, if you select one edge and come to the other side and control click this edge, it will find the shortest path. I then shift selected this edge and again control clicked. You need to make sure this time it is a shift control click so we don't lose the other selected side. A bit confusing, but hopefully you're following along. There's a few tongue twisters here, I'm struggling a little bit. I then scaled these selected edges in the X-axis. Come out of edit mode, and to smooth this pillow out we're going to add a subdivision. Again, we are renaming to keep organised. Woohoo! Let's hide this and add a backdrop. Bring in the plane and in edit mode, edge select this back edge. Extrude up in the Z-axis and bevel. This creates a nice studio looking backdrop for our scene. Shade smooth once again, and there we go. Now, all the objects we've created are ridiculously huge. Let's fix this. Scale down all the objects we have created and position roughly to where we want them to go. Don't stress too much, this can all be adjusted if needed. As you can see here, I actually amended the solidify modifiers that looked a little off. Those of you who can count may be noticing that we are lacking some pillows. Instead of creating 10 individual pillows, you can do this if you want, we are just going to duplicate 9 times. Now with our bundle of pillows, we can move them around a little to match as best as we can to the original IKEA advert. With these roughly in place, we can add a camera. Once you've added the camera, tap Ctrl-Alt number pad 0 to snap the camera to view. Naughty me hasn't yet saved, so make sure you do. Over in the scene settings, I adjusted the camera resolution to 2304 by 2933. I know these numbers are a bit weird and random, but this closely matched the advert size that I was looking for. I also came over to the camera settings and changed the focal length to 40mm. To have more control when moving the camera, come over to the camera view by tapping 0 on the number pad and then tap Shift apostrophe. This gives you game-like controls to move the camera around. WASD to move around, mouse to look around, and Q and E to go up and down. You can also scroll to change the speed of these adjustments. Once my camera was in position, I moved the backdrop along slightly, scaled the camera down to prevent it from getting in the way, and drag-clicked the top right corner of the viewport to add a new window. This is going to be our rendered view window. My scroofing was not quite right, so I rotated it in its local Y-axis. You can do this by tapping R to rotate and Y twice. With this looking better, it's time to add some lights to the scene. I started with a large area lamp. This will provide a nice base layer over our scene. Before I continued, I came over to the render settings and changed over to cycles. Then I saved. After this, I came down to the color management settings and adjusted the contrast to -2. I feel like this just looks a little better. The power of the lights can be changed further down the line, but to start I set the base light to 100 watts. We then want to duplicate this light, position it directly over our pot and scale it down. This will create a harsher shadow similar to our reference. We want this second light to be half the power of our main light. At this stage I felt as though our main light wasn't quite bright enough, so I doubled it to 200. I would say this scene's looking good. Now for the fun part, materials. We're going to stop with the backdrop just because it's the easiest. Add a material and change it to a darkish blue. I also brought the roughness up. As always, this can be adjusted later. Next, let's create the material for the bottle. Drag this window down here up and switch it to the shading tab. I'm actually following Glenn Madden's clear plastic material tutorial on YouTube. We will be making some changes though just to better match our reference. So to start, let's just name this material Bottle. We don't need this principal BSDF shader, so we are going to delete it. In its place, we are going to add 2 glossy BSDF shaders and 2 mix shaders. Link all these up and you should see a result in the rendered view window. We are then going to add a glass BSDF shader and a layer weight. Link the Fresnel to the fact of the mix shader and the glass BSDF to the shader option of the mix shader. Change the value of the layer weight to 0.2 and this mix shader to 0.05. Change the roughness of this glossy shader to 0 and this shader to 0.2. The colour of the bottle is looking a little bit weird now, so we're going to change the colour of the glass shader to an orangey red. I think this is looking pretty good. Then selecting our twisty thing, I still don't know what this is called, we can add our bottle material to it. With the bottle done, we are moving on to the cap. By the way, we will be adding these materials later, so don't worry if yours doesn't look perfect right now because we're going to add to it. I went with a straight black here and just brought the roughness down a little bit. I felt the edges of my cap were a little bit too harsh, so I brought these loop cuts back by alt selecting them and in the edge select, scaled the top ones in and the side ones down. In our reference, you can see that the cap has an extra light reflecting off it. I felt like I wanted to recreate this and bring in some light to the side of the scene. I duplicated our base light again and brought it down at an angle and scaled. This, however, disrupted the shadows of the rest of the scene too much, so I decided to bring the power of this new light down to 20 watts. Now, the label. For the label, we're going to want to add an image texture. To do this, we'll need to UV unwrap our cylinder. If you do this straight away, you're going to get a weird looking UV. We don't want a weird looking UV, so let's mark a seam around the back somewhere out of view. This will allow us to unwrap our cylinder in a rectangular shape. We want our label to look like this. I unfortunately don't have access to the design that they used for this label, so I recreated it myself. I did this using a website called Figma. This is free to use and gives us a few useful tools. Now yes, this is a simple design, but it still only took me around 5 to 10 minutes to create. Let's apply this image to our model. Add a material to your label and bring in an image texture node. I connected this to the base colour of the Principled BSDF shader and opened my recreated design. Come over to the UV editor and in Vertices Select, tap A to select full. Right clicking and selecting UV unwrap will surprisingly unwrap your mesh. You'll notice my image is mirrored. You may need to do this too if your texture is showing on your model back to front. I'm not sure why it does this, but it does. Move your projected UV into a suitable position and bam, we have our label. Pillows. Let's add a material to these little guys. For this, I loosely followed Ryan King Art's YouTube tutorial on creating a procedural fabric material. Bring in a texture coordinate and a wave texture. Connect the UV to the vector, link the colour of the wave texture to the colour ramp, and slightly bring up the black slider. Select the wave texture and the colour ramp and duplicate. Have the original wave texture to be set in the y-axis. This will create a cross weave pattern. I gave myself a bit more space in this window and connected a value node to the scale of both wave textures, then scaled to 250. I brought up the distortion of both of the wave textures to 7 and the detail to 15. To pair the colour ramps, we want to bring in a mixed colour node. Now to change the colour of the pillows, we can bring in another colour ramp. The colour of these two sliders will represent the colour of the stitching. I set mine to a light grey and white. To adjust the roughness, duplicate this colour ramp. As this is a fabric material, we also want to bring up the sheen. Next, I spent what felt like 35 minutes applying this material to each pillow. Lots of fun. With that finished, I believe it is time for us to render. To do this, tap F12. And there we go, we're done. So, let's add some imperfections to our bottle material. I used the Polygon add-on and downloaded the free smudges texture and scratches texture. We can drag this directly from its folder into the node setup of our bottle material. I like to quickly add a Principled BSDF shader just to switch between and better see what we're working with, like this. We want to adjust the contrast of these smudges, so I'm going to bring in a colour ramp. The material hasn't correctly scaled to our object, so to fix this we can add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node. Straight away we can see a change, however the contrast and the rotation is slightly off, so we can make a few small changes in the mapping and colour ramp node. If we switch back to the glass shader and plug it into the material output, we can see the smudges are being projected. After making a few small changes, I got closer to the look I wanted. I felt like the material was a bit distracting on this twisty bit, so I decided to duplicate the bottle material and remove the smudge texture. Now is also a good time to add a subdivision as it's looking a little bit janky. For the scratches, you can follow the same process. Once you're happy with how these scratches are looking, you can pair these up with a mixed colour node. Looking good. You don't need to do this, but I decided to add some smudges to the bottle cap too. There isn't really much detail on this cap in the IKEA advert, but I felt it might make it look a little bit more convincing. I render in a few changes later and I was happy with the cap. I also felt like it would be more interesting to have some imperfections on the label as well. As the material of the label is only an image texture, this is pretty simple. Simply drag across the smudge's texture and with a colour ramp, pair it into the base colour. Like before, add a mapping and texture coordinate node to make any adjustments. To pair the label design and our smudge texture together, we just need to plug them into the base and the roughness sliders. No mix nodes needed. I made a few more minor changes and I was happy. One of the final things that was really bugging me was the pillows. It was pretty obvious that it was just the same model over and over again, and it became a little bit distracting. To make some quick changes to these models, I decided to come over to the sculpting tab. Using mainly the grab and draw tool, we can make the needed changes to our pillow. Specifically with the draw tool, if you hold Control, you can press into the model. This creates some nice looking creases and bumps. I also made sure to get rid of any straight lines as the edges all seem to be a bit fake looking. After rotating, flipping and sculpting some of the other pillows, they all started to look slightly different. The backdrop here looked a little bit too dark, so I added a light to fill the shadows. I also brought in a new plane to block this light from affecting the bottle's shadow. We're nearly there. The transparency of our bottle isn't quite right, so we can add a transparency node with a mix shader here. Make sure you're adding this to the twirly thing too. With this and another small adjustment to the colour of the glass shader, I'm finally happy. Or so I thought. Really quickly I came back and increased the size of the cap. It's not realistic, but from the camera's view it looks better in my opinion. And there we go. That's it. Done. I'm finished. This is my second tutorial, so please give any feedback if you have any. I thought I'd try out this format of a more edited video. I'm hoping it's easy to follow along. I really appreciate you watching this tutorial. Please subscribe and like this video, and I'll see you next week.